Thank you, Tracy, and thank you to the Virginia SBDC for having me here for this webinar, Leading, Marketing, and Being Productive in a Crisis. And so welcome everybody to the webinar, and let's just talk about our agenda for today. Very quickly, housekeeping items. If you have a question, Tracy has the Q&A panel open here for you to be able to ask questions. So feel free to put those questions into the question panel, and we'll answer those questions when we get to the end. Of course, you can always ask questions afterward. I'll have my email address on the final slide so that you can reach out to me. And of course, for those of you who know me, know that I love Twitter, so feel free to always message me at Twitter at W3 Consulting, and you can hashtag it Beyond Google, and I will see it there. And of course, follow at Virginia SBDC, more important than any time now, as they're putting out timely information about what's happening and retweeting resources for folks during this crisis. So my agenda for today is really to cover three large kind of groupings of topics. And first is just leadership in a crisis, how you should be leading your company and teams in a crisis. I want to then talk about marketing in a crisis. Those two pieces really fit together fundamentally. And then, of course, being productive in this and during any crisis, because I think it's really important for us all to really give some consideration to how we're really getting things done, especially when it comes to marketing, but really our entire company's productivity is going to take a hit in a crisis, and how we should really approach those. So I've tried to lump these into about 4 different items per category so that we have a better idea about how to just kind of have this discussion. And of course, if you have specific questions, you can always ask those, and I'll be able to answer those during the Q&A time. So let's just get started. What I wanted to start off with is the fact that there are any number of different types of crises that can befall a business. And I've had the luxury, I suppose, of having almost every kind of them happen, from experiencing 9/11 as a small business owner, straight through to having dealt with a business partner dissolution at some point in time, not necessarily a disaster, but when you end a business relationship, there is, of course, some fallout from those kinds of circumstances. And I've had a business, my building caught fire for a business, for this business. There's all kinds of things that happen. We've been through, economic recession. So I've just experienced how and what to do in all of these crises over time. And as I have been hearing people talk about the novel coronavirus 2019 and COVID-19 and everyone's responses to it, I wanted to give my experience and best advice in this environment, especially when it comes to marketing in this age, because there is a lot of snake oil sales going on, and potentially some inappropriate content that's being put out there as it relates to the situation. So I just wanted to give that umbrella, kind of advice, and then really answer questions that are topical to you all. So we'll do that near the end. But there are any number of different types of disasters, and I just wanted everyone to be aware of the fact that it doesn't have to just be this situation. It can be any number of situations that can come up, and you need to be resilient in the face of all of those. And you're doing the first best step, which is that you're here and you're spending the time to learn how to pause and plan and react and respond well in that environment. So I want to talk a little bit about each of those pieces: leading, managing, and marketing during a crisis. That is, leading, marketing, and being productive in a crisis, so that we can just be more resilient as businesses, all told. So let's start off with leading during a crisis. I think that many times we have a misunderstanding of how to be good leaders as small business owners. Most small business owners aren't probably great leaders. We are technicians. We are skilled in some capacity, or we have a passion about something, and we thrust ourselves, or we are thrust into owning a business. And that gives us the opportunity to do great things for our families by creating financial stability, great things for our community by being and investing as community members. But many times, the one thing we don't get trained in is how to actually manage and lead our teams. And then during a crisis, what was the normal working order then becomes upset. And some of those problems rise to the top very, very quickly. And so during a crisis, I just think it's important for us to really keep a north compass, kind of the a due north on our own leadership and moral compass when it comes to these things, and that helps our business stay on the right foot. Now, I can't necessarily speak to all of the various things that are going to happen in a crisis. There is a potential economic recession. There are all kinds of things that are specific maybe to your business or to specific industries like travel and tourism are obviously going to be impacted, not beyond repair, but maybe beyond repair to your business. And that may mean that some businesses will go out of business. And you need to make that choice whether or not to potentially furlough employees or lay them off and those kinds of things. I can't necessarily answer or speak to those specific situations as it relates to it, but these are more high level things that you can think about and then execute on today, and it will make you a better leader during these crises. So first and foremost, is this is not a time to panic. I was actually just joking with Tracy before we started broadcasting that at least in the first world, here in the United States, we have the opportunity to panic, and it's somewhat of a luxury. That if you're panicking, that's a first world problem, and many people out there don't have the opportunity to panic. All they have to do is go back out there and keep working. And hats off to the doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers and other essential business folks who are out there who are helping to keep our grocery shelves stocked and doing those really wonderful things that are necessary for us to stay even in this situation as well as we can be. So don't panic. This is not the time to panic. And actually, it's never a time to panic in a crisis. What you should really do is spend this opportunity to be able to pause and plan. And what I mean by that is spend some time figuring out what it is as is the appropriate response in a circumstance. And as a leader, your job in a small business environment is to be able to set a direction for people. And if you don't know what direction you want to go in, then people generally won't know what direction to go in, and they will potentially go in different directions. And that's not helpful, when you're trying to lead a team. So I just really, and in any crisis, I just like to sit down and say, okay, this is what's going on. What's the information that I know? And based on past experience, based on research, whatever it is that I can cobble together, what is the plan of action? And I can always change direction, but I need to at least have a plan of action for moving forward. Case in point, the when we had the building fire, it was one of those cases where, thank goodness, no one was harmed, but our office was destroyed, and we had to make some really thoughtful decisions about how we would move forward as a company in order to be able to have everyone be safe, how we were going to work, whether those operations would exist in a new office environment or people would move to a remote work environment. All of that stuff came up immediately upon us recognizing this particular catastrophe. So you just need to take this time to pause and plan. Do not start just making decisions left and right without thinking through what could or couldn't happen based on your actions. So I've been hearing nonstop from business owners throughout this particular crisis with COVID-19, and them just spouting off things that they're going to do without thinking about the unintended consequences of those actions. And of course, in a fast moving and a fast changing dynamic situation, you obviously get a little bit concerned about what you should and shouldn't be doing, and that's why pausing really gives you an opportunity to step away from your emotions and think a little bit more logically. And that helps you then go out there and make the best decision as the leader of your organization. And so that's, again, I can't put a fine enough point on it for most people to. I know that it's nerve-wracking. Maybe you have family members who have contracted the coronavirus. Maybe you have people who are out there who are potentially subject to being sensitive populations to this, and you're nervous and you're worried about your own health potentially. There's all of these things going on. You have to just take a deep breath and recognize that there are things you can do, and action thoughtful action is better than no action, and certainly panicking is not going to help anyone. So pause and plan, don't panic. Next up is, as a leader, it's really important for you to project calm. And one of the things that I feel like I've done really well over the past years is that in any crisis, whether that be a major client pulled a deal, to technology meltdowns, to any number of different things, uh, you know, having a calm perspective or a calm presence for people is by itself an ability to help others not panic. And when you are in front of others, and I don't mean physically in front of others, but when you are interacting with people who are looking, say, up to you or looking to you for direction, the last thing that they want is to see you quaking in your boots. They need you to be confident and calm in the situation, and it's really important for you to be able to project that level of serenity in and amongst all of the other chaos that's going on. It's not disregarding the fact that there isn't chaos going on. There's a lot of chaos in the world. But among all the things that are chaotic, if you can provide just a little bit of safe space, that's a really good place for people to be able to do their own pausing and planning, and to give great ideas to you, and to continue to be productive in an environment that may be fast changing. So I always like to tell people that I'm I'm the center of the hurricane, right? As a leader who is a bit of a crazy maker, call me visionary if you want to call it that. But I tend to be the one with big ideas and wanting to go in bold directions. And I always say, like, I'm the hurricane, and you need to be in the eye of the storm where it's nice and quiet, uh, and I can create that space for you to be there. And what people like about that is that, yes, there's a lot of chaos happening around them, which is typically me, but I'm able to give them the safe space in which they can put out bad ideas. They can have a safe space to say, you know what, this isn't working. We need to change directions. And I'm not going to be upset with them for throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks. And that's a really good place for any leader to be, whether it be during a crisis or in a crisis or outside of a crisis. But I think especially during a crisis, giving people a safe space to say, you know what, how about we try this innovative thing with our customers, or maybe we try this different thing with regard to how we respond to the situation, and saying, okay, well, let's look at it from an efficacy perspective. Can we actually do this? Are those things possible? And calm gives us that place to do it. Okay, next up is transparency. uh, this is really difficult for a lot of small business owners, because what they want to do is to typically clam up and deal with what they can deal with behind the scenes. But in a moving crisis, you need to be able to be transparent with your stakeholders. And what I mean by that is not all of a sudden giving away all of your IP and letting business secrets out the front door, but it is letting people know what is actually going on. And this gives a level of, I don't know if you want to call it safety, but it gives a level of trust to everyone involved. So it's not good for employees or your staff to get a different message from you than the message you're giving to your stakeholders, potentially investors, potentially to your customers, and to vendors. Everyone should be getting, hopefully, the same uh, level of respect and trustworthiness from you in terms of messaging. So yes, investors may be hearing different words from you, but they shouldn't be getting different facts. And so the facts shouldn't change in speaking to them than when speaking to employees and otherwise. Not during a crisis. It tends to hurt you long term, if you are being duplicitous in the way in which you communicate from one set of folks to another. People just really need transparency in those moments. So if there is no floor, there's just no floor, and you should let people know. And many times, this is the thing about it, is that if you say to your customers, we're not going to be able to stay open without your help, or we're not sure we can even satisfy our upcoming contract because the people we plan to put on site with you are no longer going to be able to get there. We're sheltering in place. That's the kind of hard conversation that's better to be had up front than to not communicate it or to put some guise over it and then it fester and create a bigger problem on later down the road. It's really important to say up front, listen, this is not going to happen, and then at least your clients and stakeholders, other people involved, have the opportunity to be able to do their own pausing and planning. But the later you hold out giving that information, then the more likely there's going to be problems down the road. So I just really like the idea of transparency when it comes to these crisis situations. And I know that from my own perspective, I tend to be an under communicator. Kind of if it's working, then there's no reason to upset the apple cart, so to speak. But I know that during a crisis, that's when communication needs to be stepped up, and transparency is one of those components. And the next item is all about kind of situation reports, that once you do start to show that level of transparency, you cannot just cut off after that first initial hard conversation. You just like the military uses in terms of situation reports, the sit rep. I think that you need to sit rep frequently, which is that once you open up the floodgates of saying to people, this is a situation, for good or for bad, you then need to keep updating people about that situation so that they know. And it just helps you um, not have to presume that it's all on your own shoulders. And that was actually very helpful for me, especially during the Great Recession, which was, when in the midst of all of this, I owned a real estate company at that time. It was really powerful for me to be able to know that I had our investors and our other stakeholders, our other, organizations, partner organizations, that by being transparent with them about our concerns, about what was happening, how we were going to survive this particular circumstance, and some of the fallout that was naturally going to happen, by having that conversation with them up front, and then immediately thereafter saying, okay, well, we're going to do a weekly call. And every week, we're going to have a discussion about what we need to do and what we're learning along the way. That created a level of trust, and included in that the transparency, but the trust was really there, that people actually felt more inclined to put greater investment dollars into the business, to give us more business. There were people out there who were like, well, we have extra deals that we can send your way. And all of a sudden there was this whole new way in which we were working better together than we were before the crisis had started. So I think that doing sit reps frequently are actually really imperative during the crisis. And then you can choose how you go forward with it after the crisis, which is a whole nother, kind of argument and decision. But during the crisis, it's really important that you know who's going to step up to the plate, so to speak, during those crises. So, for example, what I learned is that there were certain partners of ours that I thought were really good partners, and they disappeared. Right? They went AWOL in that circumstance, and that helped me know, what, in a crisis, this person gets, as they say, lily livered, and disappeared on us. That's not someone I want to trust in a crisis. So why would I do business with them going forward after the crisis? And so it really tested the bonds of those relationships. And it helped us understand who was going to have our back and who wasn't going to have our back in a tough situation. Because honestly, even throughout the crisis and surviving the crisis, there were much bigger transactions that we were doing where we really needed their back. And if for some reason they chose to back out in those circumstances, that would have been way more damage than during the Great Recession. So it's good to know that up front. And if you can learn that during the crisis, then this is a good time to do that as well. So, as I said, sit rep frequently. Those are the four kind of umbrella areas that I wanted to talk about with regard to leading in a crisis. And as I said, I wanted it to be somewhat high level so you could have an idea about where my mindset is in this regard. And what I want to do in each of these segments is kind of now give a little bit of thought in terms of context for this particular circumstance where we're dealing with COVID-19 and the global pandemic surrounding it. And so that is the response surrounding the global pandemic. And so from my perspective, right now we just don't know what we don't know. We don't know how many people are infected in the United States specifically, and even more specifically in Virginia. We have shelter-in-place orders that are happening, and so we have some side, supply chain side issues happening, and of course, consumer side demand problems because we just don't know when we're going to be able to have business as usual again. So in this particular case, what I would really like to see people doing is to spend some time making sure that what we are learning, we are communicating with our target audiences. And this may seem like it's overkill because so many people are communicating their kind of coronavirus response, but you don't know in your own target market who hasn't heard from you the same good information that other folks have heard from other good reputable sources. So I think it really behooves everybody, just from a leadership perspective, setting aside the marketing component here, is that from a leadership perspective, that you be transparent about what you know about what's going on here, using good resources and communicating on that level, especially as to, are you open? Are you keeping your business open? Are you going to be closing your doors temporarily? That is, if you are, say, a restaurant and you obviously can't now have eat-in dining, are you doing takeout? That's information that you want to be communicating, and you need to be communicating with your staff and stakeholders, investors, but especially your customers, because they may not know that. Updating your Google My Business listing, for example, to make sure that office hours and so on and so forth are accurate, are just good things to be doing, which falls into that category of sit rep. So just keep that all in mind as you make your way through, so that you are communicating and communicating in a way that helps people understand what is actually going on. So, okay. Next up is I wanted to cover the notion of marketing during a crisis. There's so much that I could say here, and I'm going to try and relegate my comments to about 10 to 15 minutes or so here, so that we have enough time for the rest of the webinar. But I could spend 2 to 3 days talking about all the things that are just being put out there that are really either poor timing or just inappropriate during a crisis. And so just be you have to buffer yourself from a lot of this garbage. So just be aware for yourself that you're going to see a lot of communications and a lot of stuff that goes out there. Some of it that is politically charged, some of it that is racially charged, and some of it that is just bad marketing during a global pandemic. And I know that none of you are going to do these things, but just be mindful of the message that you're putting out there for people, so that you can be a source of that same level of calm and collectedness that people need when, yeah, we're all panicking. We're all concerned about our family and our welfare and our economy and, all of those things. So while we're all in that headspace, the last thing you want to be doing is to be using fear-based marketing tactics that are going to cause people to spend money in a way that would be irresponsible. And so just don't do it. Just be a good global citizen, and be a good Virginian, be a good small business owner, be a good friend to your community. And so just be mindful as we move forward throughout this about how your marketing is going to be impacting people, because they're going to remember that over the long term. And so that leads me to kind of the first step here. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and several other organizations have put this out there, but they've been giving people examples of ways in which they can continue to support local businesses like yours. And so they give some really great examples. As I said before, if you're a local restaurant or any type of eatery, and you still are capable of operating as an essential business, and that means you can do delivery, you can have takeout or curbside pickup and those kinds of things. Obviously, those are some that's great because it continues to bring revenues in. Maybe it doesn't mean your entire staff is going to be able to continue to operate like servers and otherwise, but maybe you can at least stave off some of the impact on your business by doing so. For those businesses that are not taking money online, I really, really urge everybody to start figuring that out now. There are great tools out there. If you just go to Wave Invoices, just Google Wave Invoices, you're capable of creating really quick payment tools, whether that be invoicing as well as buttons on your website for you to be able to take payment. PayPal obviously has their components for you to be able to do that. You may decide to temporarily create a Shopify e-commerce store so that you can provide your products and services through web purchases, online purchases, as opposed to people coming directly to your store. I've been beating the drum for a decade now that businesses need to have a website, and they need to be able to not only produce from a marketing perspective, leads from the web, but they need to be able to satisfy customers' needs and wants through online purchases. If now isn't a great example of that, I don't know what is. This is the time to start thinking about where is our website, and are we capable of selling online? And if this persists, like say we're sheltered in place for another 2-3 months, maybe longer than that, or maybe we all go back to business as usual over the summer, and then this comes back in a second wave. How is your business going to survive if you cannot take people's money where they're at, which means their homes, on their computers, or from their mobile devices? So this is the time to start thinking about, how do I get a website up? How do I get an e-commerce solution up? And this doesn't mean you have to create some kind of like super e-commerce store like Walmart or Target level thing. It is just a literal page on your website where you can take payments for the products or services that you provide. So it can be very, very lightweight, or it can be very sophisticated. You have to make that choice based on your budget and your situation in the business, and whether or not you can shift your products or services to an online space. Some businesses won't, and this is where you need to get creative, because now you need to start thinking, well, are we providing the right product or service for this time in history? And it may be that you're not, and maybe you can shift or provide different services. So maybe right now you provide some kind of in-person education training or in-person consulting. Can you switch that to a virtual service where you provide that training in a virtual space? Maybe that's not your best skill. Maybe then now is the time to decide that you're going to maybe create some written materials that can be provided to customers, and that's a downloadable product that you provide through Amazon or another large-scale platform, or through your website. You need to get creative about how you're approaching your business model in this environment, so that then you can start figuring out the rest of the parts of your pricing and promotions as it relates to your marketing. A lot of businesses are not taking this moment to get creative, and they just think, well, I've got to shut my doors, and so, you know, we're just shutting the business down, when in reality, a lot of this can be done in a digital environment and still have a viable business on the other side of the crisis. A couple other examples that I really like, the idea of doing gift cards or booking services for businesses in the future. Another suggestion from the Chamber of Commerce and Google Small Business and other folks have been offering that as an option. I think that's really great. But this is also the time to reach out to your current customer base and talk to them about things that they need, because it could be that your services fit in line with something that they do need. And this is the time to be having that conversation with them. So get creative about how you communicate with them. And might I also add, if you do not have an email marketing list, if you do not have a list of all of your customers to communicate with, put that on your checklist of things that you need to do, because this is not the last time a crisis will be happening. And email is just such an easy way to get out to your intended parties, the people you need to get in touch with. I'll harken back to our building fire. One of the first things I thought was, okay, we just need to send an email to let everybody know that all operations are still fine. Nobody's data was compromised. Everything is good. We just need to get that message out. And the best way to get that out was through our email. It was just, okay, let's execute an email. Let's get everybody looped in on what is going on in the business. The business is still in business. We're still satisfying customers' needs. Everything is as it was. We just are impacted from a time perspective because our office is all crispy. So it was just one of those things we just needed to let everybody know, because we started getting the emails. People were saying, oh my gosh, I saw this in the news. I saw this on Twitter. I saw your building go up in flames. And while it was shocking to all of us, including myself, but it was one of those circumstances where, just being and thinking, okay, we have a way to communicate with our clients immediately, and letting them know. Forget the rest of the general public. This was just communicating to the people who were our clients, that we wanted to be able to let know that things were okay. And so you need to have that list, and you need to start building that list if you don't have it, to make sure that you can communicate with your clients, and of course your target audience on a larger scale, for lead generation and otherwise. But really being able to communicate with your customers is really important. Okay, so get creative, be creative with how you start to think about marketing in and during the crisis. Again, always be appropriate. This is not the time to start, doing fear or panic-based marketing. Certainly not, throwing dollars and cents at things that might be foolish to do at this time. But it's just a really good idea to kick the tires around and ideate with your team, with colleagues. Think about your marketing alliances. Now might be the opportunity to reach out to other folks. So say that you are a yoga instructor and your yoga studio is now closed to the general public. Well, that doesn't mean that you can't film material. Maybe you decide to do a video program where you and a nutritionist or a registered dietitian and a fitness coach or a fitness trainer, fitness expert, someone who is in the mind body space, someone who's capable of helping with mindset and performance psychology. Get all of these people together, and maybe you do a round robin of content that then can be put out, and letting people know that they can still stay healthy and well physically, do some self-care during the crisis. And what that means is that, yes, you're going to take a hit on the yoga studio up front, but as long as you have enough reserves to be able to get onto the other side of that, a lot of those people are going to be so thankful for the work that you're doing, that they will then convert to customers on the other side of it, and come check out your yoga studio and check out the other professionals that were in and a part of your program, to be able to do that. Or maybe you decide that that's a new vehicle that becomes a new product line, where you can now create that content and charge for it in a space for people to be able to access. So get creative, be creative. If you have specific questions about these things, feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to have a discussion with you as to whether or not that would work from a marketing perspective or otherwise. Okay, next up is this is just branding 101, which is that people like consistency. There is a reason why people shop at Target and Walmart and McDonald's and you name the big brand, and then go into one of those big brands stores. And what is the thing that gets people? It's consistency. If I go up to a Chipotle in any city in the United States, I'm going to get basically the same service and the same product. And that is the same with Target or you name any other fast food chain or any other big department store. And one of the challenges small business owners face is that during a crisis, or just generally, actually, small business owners typically don't have many locations and the level of sophisticated consistency that happens on a big business level. But one of the things you do have control over is having a consistent message, being consistent in the way in which you position your marketing. It doesn't mean don't be creative. It doesn't mean be stodgy about things, but it's about being consistent in the way in which you present the message. So even during a crisis, that doesn't mean that you go off brand and start talking about other things that are not within the purview of what you need to be talking about. And it's, this is not the time to become a medical professional or a public health professional official and start, spouting those kinds of things. Now is the time to be able to give good information as to what you know about your business and how you're going to be doing it, but do it within the consistency of the brand. And that also means that if people expect certain things from you, so say for example, your business is not really impacted by COVID-19's kind of the response we need to do to it, but you are still providing and you're still providing services in your business, then this is not the time to start stopping that. You should continue to keep providing the communications and the marketing that you normally do, being mindful of the situation, but that doesn't mean that you completely go off script now and start going off in other directions. What I see is that the businesses that come to me, and they're doing and have been doing the right things, and people are now at home and capable of still accessing the services, still accessing the products, and so on and so forth from those businesses, then the consistency of that messaging will be good for them now and after the crisis is over. So it's really important to consistently communicate with customers the way that you have been. And if you have not been consistent, now is the time to start thinking, well, you know what? We're sending out a newsletter that looks different than our website, and our social media looks, ragged. It just looks kind of inconsistent with the rest of our brand. We got a new logo a year ago, but we never really updated the profiles in these other networks that we haven't been really active on. Now is the time to start cleaning up the brand and getting those pieces in line so that you can start looking consistent to people. Because the more consistency that I see, the more likely I am to go to you and to become comfortable with working with you. So that repetition of the same thing over and over again is not bad. And that also means that if you're open for business, you need to keep telling people that you're open for business, because every week is new. We're all dealing with this circumstance where we're really not sure what's going to happen next week. So just because you told me today that you're open for business doesn't mean you're open tomorrow. And so you really need to make sure that if you have that kind of business where people need to know you're still providing those services, we're still shipping products, we're still manufacturing, we're still creating things, we're still available for consultation, uh, you know, especially if you have a business where you're consulting today for services that might be provided in several months from now, you can still have those consultations and you can still be open for business in that category and let people know about that. But be consistent about letting people know during the crisis what's happening and how it's happening, and that becomes a brand message that is really, really powerful for you going forward. Okay. I wanted to switch gears a little bit to the idea of speeding up and slowing down the various marketing campaigns that you might be having and going on. So, say you're a really organized business and you have a content editorial calendar and you have your various marketing campaigns that you had scheduled for this year, this quarter, what have you. And now, with this circumstance happening, you need to adjust. You need to be able to figure out, well, you know what? We were planning on doing this marketing campaign in July. Well, we know that that's our big push. Maybe we need to do that now as opposed to later, so that in our sales cycle, people make that decision and help us recoup cash flow that we are otherwise losing in the next couple of months as opposed to later in the year. So you need to start making those what's fungible, what's capable of being moved, moving those things around, and also being very, very cognizant of maybe you had some stuff scheduled to go out and it may be inappropriate at this time. So anything that you have automated, start looking at those automations and figuring out whether or not those automated items need to be looked at or scheduled items need to be looked at because they may be inappropriate at this time. I don't just mean inappropriate in messaging, but inappropriate in the sense that you may not be able to or should not be marketing those things at this time because you won't be able to know whether you can satisfy customers' needs at that time. So just kind of keep that in mind as you move forward. There may be things that you want to create now in terms of content that you weren't thinking about creating then, which means you need to speed up because you need to produce that content to get it out the door. So, for example, our work in helping educate businesses about getting websites and e-commerce shops up and learning, though that's all now in full scale ramp up, so people know, hey, by the way, if you don't have these things, you need to start getting these things up and running so that you have the infrastructure in place. So if I haven't already said this, and I know I did, you should have a website and you should certainly be able to take people's money if they want to give it to you on the web. And so the goal then is to figure out what needs to happen in your web presence for your business to be able to get those things going, which means that's a speed up, right? And that may mean that other parts of your marketing plan need to slow down and you need to make those adjustments. But now is the time to do that pause and plan to say, okay, we're going to shift this and hold this back and kind of adjust as we go. So just keep that in mind. Okay. This is also a time that you may have some extra time. So I know that for those of us who had a commute before, we got up every day, we went to our office or we went to our store and we were working, and then we came home from that space. There was a commute there, and so you're actually saving some time in the sense that you're not having to make that commute, presumably, some of us at least, and or you're also not satisfying as many customers throughout the days because people are all sheltering in place and things have shut down, especially if you're B2B and your clients are busy dealing with their own businesses, so they don't really have time to interact with you. Whatever the circumstance may be, this is the time to be taking notes as to what was missing from your marketing strategy today that will help you for future crises. And I recognize this very early on, and realize that if I identified what worked well and what didn't work well in past crises, we would be prepared for future crises. So, for example, we are now fully remote. We no longer are a physical location based company. I traveled a lot for work anyway, so the rest of my staff always dealt with me in a remote capacity. I always used to say I'm the absent, not absent-minded CEO of W3 Consulting, and so people were just used to dealing with me, but everybody else saw each other and they worked with each other and they enjoyed that camaraderie. But going forward, it just made a lot of sense for us that we prepare ourselves for a point in the future where we were remote. So I decided, okay, we're going to spend some time working remotely while we get through this issue with the office being shut down, and let's just test it. Let's just see how the experience is for us, and then we'll make a decision as to whether or not and how we go forward with a physical plant in the future. And then we came to that end result, the time frame that I had set for the company, and we decided, oh well, we're all doing really well working from home or remote working, having folks go to co-working spaces and work there, and worked out the budget and realized that it would work. And so we made that change by taking notes during the crisis and debriefing right after it, and then making some plans for it. So use this time now to figure out what marketing pieces would be really good for you to create now that would be useful in the future. That is, in the next crisis, you don't want to have to be scrambling to go and create graphics and messages and letting people know about those things. What are the things you can create? Maybe they're just templates, but start writing up those things now so that you can be better at communicating to clients in the future. I want to switch gears one final time to talk about productivity in a crisis, because many times what happens is that labor productivity drops in any crisis. And what I wanted to do is just give you some suggestions in terms of how you can work both yourself but also with your team to stay productive during crises. And so I just want to cover these really quickly so that you have an idea. Number one is I hear this all the time, and now I'm giving a solution because the rest of the time I don't particularly have a solution for it, which is people are like, I have so much time, I don't know what to do with myself now. And I keep saying to all the small business owners around me, well, you've been saying, you know what, I'm not so great in front of a camera, or I'm not so great taking video, or I can't catch up on my blog, so I'm just not going to blog at all. Or I've been really thinking about launching a podcast, and but I just don't have the time. Guess what? You now have the time. If you are stuck at home, and or your business is you know is slow right now, this is the absolute time to learn a new skill. There are so many different avenues to get free or low cost training in a whole wide variety of areas. If you want to understand how your website is doing, you need to know a little bit of statistics. So you can go to Khan Academy and learn Khan Academy statistics through one of their free courses. If you need to learn a little bit about web design, getting a website up and running, there are countless courses on Udemy. So think about ways in which you need to improve. If you need to step up your Facebook game or Instagram game, go to Facebook's Blueprint program, where you can take free courses on how to get good at Instagram and Facebook, both social, organic posting, as well as advertising. So think about ways in which you want to improve and do that. Also, the flip side is that maybe you have some staff issues where people are not as productive because they are working in an environment that they're not used to working. This is a really great time to help those people become more productive, so you can do that professional development for your team now while you have the time. So spend the time now to get people uh, you know kind of organized around being more productive in the organization, because when people are not in your physical space and you don't see them producing, then many times you start to think that they are not as useful to the organization, and that may not be the case. It's just that the change of environment and the crisis that's currently affecting all of us then becomes something of an issue. So be thoughtful as you start to think about, what can I do to help my team going forward, help my staff get better. Maybe you have a sales staff that's on the floor selling to clients when they walk into your retail environment. Now's the time to be doing some sales training with them and empowering them with greater and better skills, so that on the flip side of this, they now get to test those skills out there in your store and in the world at large. Um, Next up is just communication. Communicating well is very difficult in a remote environment, and I learned this myself. I'm not a big fan of always on communication generally. I tend to be an under communicator, in the sense that once I've told something what I want, in terms of what I want to be done, then I presume that unless you ask me questions, I don't need to provide any further clarification. I've given you everything that I think you need, and so go do it. It turns out that remote teams don't generally flourish under that paradigm. So you need to actually, I don't like to use the phrase over communicate. You just need to communicate well and often enough so that people are aware that you're there and available to them. So, for example, I've created office hours so that people know when it is I have an open door, quote unquote, virtually, for them to be able to come to me and ask questions, and also to just have kind of a water cooler type chat with me, as opposed to when we're in the thick of important meetings where we have an agenda and are covering those things. Anyway, the point is that during these times, it's really important to be able to communicate with everyone in the way in which they best receive information. And this is the important part. A lot of people think, well, I'm just going to start sending email. I'm going to send a whole bunch of mass email, and every day I'm going to send an email to everybody with all the things that I want them to be doing. And the reality is that that is not the best way that everybody receives information. You may have to call one person, whereas you may have to text message with another, where you may have to jump onto video chat with another person, and maybe check in with some people multiple times per day, as opposed to other people where you can give them a list of things to do and they can run with it because they're highly skilled in that capacity, and they don't need oversight. They don't need a lot of hand holding when it comes to those things. So this is a good time to learn how your team works, and especially in a crisis, the best way to do that is to ask them. So if anyone ever asks me, hey Ray, how's the best way to work with you, it's certainly not to send me a 45 paragraph email with everything that you ever wanted me to do. It's very likely that I'm going to take that email and file it away and probably not look at it again. But if an employer came to me and said, hey Ray, I need you to do these 45 things, I'm going to send you 45 emails over the course of 3 weeks, and I'm going to send you those things. Is that okay with you? I would say absolutely. I would love for you to send me one email per item so that I can look at that one item, deal with that one item, and then once it's out of sight, I know that it's completed, and that gives me control over the workload that I'm dealing with. That's me. I'm unique, and so are all the people that you're working with, and you need to make sure that you are communicating with them. How do they best want to be communicated with? This also then translates productivity wise to your vendors, who are also dealing with this crisis, to your customers and clients who are dealing with this crisis. They may decide, hey, you know what, we normally meet face to face for our uh, annual consultation. Well, can we actually do that by phone? Because I'm not comfortable on camera, and I would really like to still talk to you about this thing that's important, and I need to have that conversation with you, but I just don't want to do it on camera. Totally fine. You can do that now because you've asked them. So start asking people how they're most productive, and then communicate with them in that fashion. And you're going to get more out of people than if you just start barraging them with communication or having an expectation of them that you haven't communicated to them out the gate. Okay, next up is all about setting people up for success. So, as I always talk about when it comes to any kind of remote work environment, especially working from home, you have to think about people's mindset, which includes, in essence, how people are performing, how people think about performance. That is, many people believe that when they're not in front of people, they're not performing. And so you need to help people understand that even though you're out of view, you're still your output, your deliverables are the performance that I'm expecting. So you need to think about kind of letting people know that the mindset should be that when I'm working, whatever that time is, that you're on stage, that you're literally performing for someone. And how would you act as though you were coming into the office or coming into the store and operating at that level? That's the type of mindset that you need to have. And many times environment dictates performance. It dictates our mindset. So think about it again. If you step out onto stage in front of an audience, you're going to act very differently in front of an audience of people than you would if you were to be sitting in your office with the door closed and it's just you and your computer, typing away. There is this perspective that out of sight, out of mind. And if we can start to give people a mindset of you're performing, you're in front of an audience, and how would you act if you were performing, then people start to level up their game. They start to level up their success metrics because they know that people are watching. So that's one thing there. So it's mindset. The other is then thinking about the skills that people need to be able to be successful in this kind of paradigm. So start thinking about the skills in which people are capable of using in and around the business, from a productivity perspective, but also just like how people are approaching the various technologies and tools that are being used. And of course, tools and technologies are one of those things that you need to get set up. So if you don't have the technology in place for people to be able to connect and work remotely, working from home and otherwise, now is the time to start thinking about how, if this does persist, if this continues for a longer period of time, is email the only thing we need, or do we need some place where we can share documents? Is there a place where we need to be able to synchronously communicate in a video meeting room, or those kinds of things? Now's the time to start thinking about setting up for success, no matter what the situation is, so that you can continue to keep continuity of the business going, and start thinking about how you are setting up the perspective in terms of, maybe you need a work from home agreement with your employees, so that you can say to them, okay, if you're going to work from home, these are the performance metrics that you need to meet, that are the same as if you were in the office, but they need to be translated for how that happens out of sight and working from a remote location. I then just want to end with this, and then we can go into Q&A. But it's really imperative for you to think about how people work well. And it's just a well-researched fact that people work better in groups than they work alone. And so think about it from the perspective that if people work in peer accountability groups, that is, if you have multiple people working together, they're going to, because we're social creatures, we're going to likely get more done than if we were working alone. And so if you are a solopreneur or a micropreneur and you don't have someone else to have that peer accountability, now is the time to go find a colleague or a friend or a family member who's also in this circumstance, to pair up and say, okay, I'm not going to tell you the exact particulars of what I'm doing. Maybe it's that I've got project A to complete this morning, and then I'm going to go to lunch, and then I have a video meeting with a client at 1 o'clock, and then after that I need to finish project B. I'm going to touch base with you at each of those points, and we're just going to, maybe it's a quick text message, maybe it's hopping onto Skype or Microsoft Teams or Zoom or something like that, and just having that touch point so that you don't have that level of isolation that breeds inertia. Because that's what happens when we feel isolated. We then start to lower our motivation, and we then don't get as much done. So you can do this for yourself, and you can do it for your team as well. So your staff members can be paired up with one another, and then they can be responsible for touching base with each other throughout the workday to make sure that things are getting done. And that can be very, very useful in keeping people, it's like keeping honest people honest, is the way that you do it. But peer accountability is a very, very powerful tool that, even in a remote circumstance, then those people who are peers in those accountability groups can then say, you know what, I'm seeing that this person's struggling with this thing. How can we help facilitate and support them in that capacity? So peers can be really great, kind of mirrors, and report back to their accountability partners as well as to you what things are challenging the organization in being productive while they're in this kind of environment. So just a quick recap of what I talked about. One, when you're leading during a crisis, it's important to pause and plan. As the British say, keep calm and carry on. Honesty, again, building that trust and that transparency with your stakeholders is important, and communicate as the situation changes. Don't wait till after it's all over to then know that people went elsewhere, reacted and responded in ways that doesn't benefit your business because you chose not to communicate with them throughout the crisis. From a marketing perspective, be creative, be consistent. Make sure that you're adjusting to the changing landscape. So this is not the time to just presume that nothing is different, and that you can continue with your marketing plans that you had when you set it on January 1st or whenever you decided your content schedule. And you should be getting ready for the next crisis, because it's not an if proposition, but when the next crisis happens, you should be getting prepared for those on an ongoing basis. And then finally, with regard to productivity, you want to make sure that you're leveling up your skills, your staff's skills, and any systems that you need to support your business, both in the short term and long term, or near long term, as the crisis unfolds. And then finally, communicating well, or next to finally, communicating well and often, I think, is just always a good thing. Creating expectations from your staff as well as from yourself. Like, what do you want to do in terms of sales? You know that sales are going to be impacted. What are the expectations you have of yourself to make those sales going forward? Setting up an environment that works, especially when we have a lot of spouses and children at home with employees or at home with you while you're trying to be productive throughout the crisis. And of course, peer accountability is just a great mechanism for being able to help you buffer isolation and increasing motivation for getting things done. So with that, I will turn this over to you, Tracy, for Q&A.
Great, thanks, Ray. We do have one question typed up in the question and answer window. Is there any particular advice besides what you covered about the marketing approach for a business-to-business company that's precisely about to launch in the midst of this crisis?
Yeah, so it depends on what kind of business. So you said that you're B2B, and so the thing is that there are a lot of businesses out there who right now need probably some B2B services. It's not that they don't need them. It's just that you need to figure out whether or not those businesses that you're trying to satisfy are going to still be there when the crisis is over. You may end up deciding to delay the launch to subsequent to that, but that may not be the case. It really is one of those things, or maybe you want to touch base with me by email and we can look at the particulars. For example, if you're trying to cover travel and tourism or restaurant and retail right now, that may be a difficult business. If you're B2B consulting those businesses or helping those businesses in some way, shape, or form, that may be difficult in those categories. But again, there are still slim slivers of the economy that are still roaring because that's just the nature of it, right? If you're that Ohio based company producing Purell and other hand sanitizers throughout the country, I bet you've got pretty high demand right now. So it just depends upon the type of business as to whether or not you're going to go out there. However, when it comes to marketing, you want to let people know that if you are going to launch, that this was the plan all along, and that you are open for business in the ways in which people and the ways in which you're open for business, because it can be very easy to misunderstand in the midst of a crisis how a new business is actually going to provide their services or products. So if you're going to have a grand opening with a physical retail space, that's not going to be probably well received. So you may want to delay that kind of thing. But if it's the launch of a website and people can come access those services and schedule meetings with you that are virtual and otherwise, then yes, you're probably going to have a really good digital ad campaign in place to be able to get in front of people because they're not seeing content in the normal ways that they normally do, and making sure that you are getting out there and in front of the right businesses to get started. So again, like I said, if you have specific questions in that category, feel free to email me and I'll be happy to banter with you about maybe what some good strategies are for you there.
Yeah, we have a couple of additional questions about the marketing. Any advice for messaging from a residential construction company provider? We're still considered essential and can provide home repairs.
Yeah, this is one of those cases where it depends on the types of work you're doing. But if you can continue to keep operating, making sure that you are updating all of the distribution channels, all the promotional ways that you currently let people know about those things, people are going to be cautious about having people come to their home and doing work on them. But whatever precautions you're putting into place to make sure that you are, one, keeping yourself, your employees safe, but also the residences of those homes safe. That should be right front and center in all of your marketing. So if you're doing any level of ads or taking business through marketplace platforms like Angie's List or otherwise, making sure people know these are the precautions we're taking, so we're not putting anybody at risk, and or we're minimizing risk, right? Just from that perspective, and making sure that people know that you're still capable of doing these projects on time, on budget, and so on and so forth. And if you're not, then what are the delays or what are the modifications necessary to pricing or to deliverables when it comes to those things? So just making sure that you're putting it out there that you're doing the best you can in and during this particular circumstance, whatever the crisis is, to mitigate risk to the consumer. Because remember, if I want you to do work on my home, that's already an outlay of cost that is that is of a sensitive nature, because it's my home. I want to make sure that I'm not spending too much on whatever it is, and I probably have some concerns about the quality of the work being done and all those other things, right? And typical concerns. But now, if I'm at home and you need to come into my home to do that repair, for example, I'm going to be fairly reticent to do that. So maybe it's a working with them to say, listen, we actually will schedule to do the work when you're not there, and we're making sure that we're cleaning all surfaces when we come in and when we leave, both to protect our employees but also to protect you, so that we're doing those things. So just like think about the ways in which you're putting in the concerns, the pain points of the owners of the homes, so that they're thinking, oh, you know what, this person's really got their act together. They're really thinking about how to protect me and them and provide continuity of services throughout a crisis. And that means that the next crisis come around, I'm not going to think twice about it. I'm going to call you to get that work done, because I know that you're going to have thought about that and be prepared for the future.
Okay. Is it inappropriate, considering the unemployment and business impacts, for nonprofits to be making solicitations at this time?
It depends on the nonprofit. So again, if you're doing work in the community that's going to help throughout that economic crisis, then I don't think it's inappropriate. I think it's one of those things that if people want to be generous, then they should be generous. And again, it's about being useful, accessible, informative, and helpful to the community at large. So it's about the way in which you make the ask, not so much about the ask itself. And I think that a lot of people are giving right now to a number of different charities to be able to help in that regard. If for some reason you feel like you're a non-essential charity, that your type of charitable donations being given to you, or the types of charitable donations being given to you, could be perceived as self-serving in the environment, then that's a moral, maybe ethical choice for you to be making solicitations. But if you really feel like you're doing good in the world, just like with any business that is putting marketing out there to continue to get business, even during a crisis, uh, then you should be doing that. You should be effectively marketing and soliciting funds to be able to do the good work you're doing in the world. So if you believe that you're doing good work and that it isn't going to be perceived as inappropriate in the environment that you're serving, again, you have to make that uh, uh, what do you call it, standard. You have to set that standard for yourself to decide what the community kind of feeling is, or the tone around that is. uh, then I say continue forward, asking for dollars to be spent, if you know that that's going to reap reward for the community that you're serving.
Okay. We have two additional questions. One is from a house cleaning service in terms of marketing and retaining customers. While everybody is canceling, is it better not to say anything to customers or to send them a message? So what should the message be? She pointed out that you can't really tell people that they can't be home, given that they're supposed to be sheltering in place at this point.
Right. So I think this is one of those misnomers about shelter in place orders. So people can go for a walk. They're not. This is not house arrest. We're not in a totalitarian country where people cannot leave their homes. So you need to get, like I said, you need to be creative. But people can actually leave their homes. You're capable of going to the grocery store. You're capable of going to medical appointments, and you're capable of getting fresh air. I think a good safe distance from the people who are doing the work is important here. And like I say personally, am I willing to have someone come into my home and clean right now? Probably not. But if I need someone to come in and clean, I I can go out in the backyard, or I can go for a walk around the neighborhood, and while you do your services, and that keeps us separated, as long as you're communicating with me what you're doing to minimize my risk from transmitting either way, right? Because I could have it and be asymptomatic, and you could have it and be asymptomatic, or one of your cleaning folks could have it as well. So the goal is to communicate what you're doing and letting people know that that can be done. So I think there's a gross misunderstanding about this type of information. And again, this goes to communicate good information that you know that benefits your business here. So if you're capable of, and again, I'm not a public health official, I'm not the governor, go read the various orders that are being applied to these businesses, and and seeing whether or not you are considered an essential business. And I don't know if that's the case, but figuring out those pieces, and if you can provide mitigations, then you can here. This is not a you can't at all come out of your house situation. This is that we're supposed to be providing physical distance from one another to slow the spread of a virus. So understanding that well and how to still create business continuity is kind of that navigating the fine line there. So look at the information available. Can you still operate your business? If that's a yes, then communicate with your customers. This is how we can do it. And are you willing to do that? Not everybody's going to say yes to that, but maybe there are a good majority of those people, or maybe a good minority of those people who will say yes to it. And you can take those high, high level precautions and those very clear low level precautions to make sure that they are comfortable with the way in which you provide the services.
All right. One more question. Is it smart marketing to offer a free service, or do you think that sets the wrong precedent for the future? I offer creative services such as website and logo design, digital marketing, and social media content and management.
Yeah, this ends up being one of those cases where you believe that your investment today will provide you with dollars tomorrow, and it's a perennial argument. It depends on the people who you are dealing with and the audiences, the types of businesses that you're satisfying. You should make it very clear what services people are getting from you for free, and what that really means in terms of expectation in the future. So, for example, if you say, hey, I'm going to be able to do these creative services for you today, but I'm doing this under the clear understanding that come 3 months from now, 6 months from now, I'm going to expect to be paid. Then I think it's a legitimate, good thing to build portfolio, do good for the small business community and the startup community that are clearly going to suffer over the next several quarters, and doing something good for the world. But if you feel as though you're just going to get a bunch of people who are going to be doing discount and freeloading, then it's probably not good for your business, and it will ultimately lead to you doing a lot of work for nothing. So you need to make that decision as to whether or not you're going to um, go after. It's not about uh, who you're going broadcasting to. It's about who you're selecting in to be those types of people that you're gonna help, right? So not every person is gonna have a viable business on the other side of their startup, or what have you. So are those businesses that will be able to have generated revenue to then be able to support paying you for services on the flip side. And if you're choosing wisely, then you're going to be in a better place there.
Great. Thank you, Ray, for all this great information. And thanks for everyone today for participating. Today's webinar was recorded and it'll be posted on the Virginia SBDC website under webinars and recordings. This page lists all of our upcoming webinars as well as recordings from all of our past webinars. Ray has an ongoing webinar series called Google and Beyond Marketing and Managing on the Web. All of those recordings are listed on the webinar and recordings page. This Thursday, Jennifer Woofter from our Lynchburg SBDC office is delivering tips and tricks for working from home. This is part of a new series on managing your business remotely. And finally, for those of you who are not familiar with the Virginia SBDC, we have 27 local centers across the state. We're open for business. You can get free help from our business advisors online, and you can do that by going to the locations page on the virginiasbdc.org website and searching for your local office. Again, thank you everyone for participating today.